So now we're going to spend a few mini lectures talking about exoplanets. This is a very new branch of astronomy, just like gravitational wave astronomy. And so there's a lot of really young and new scientists that are coming through that are working on exoplanets. I have this picture here of the Milky Way to remind you that every one of these pinpricks of light in the sky is a star. And around most stars, we see a planet. So pretty much anything you're looking up at the sky, unless it's one of the planets in our solar system, is a star. And you can bet, you can be pretty certain that there is a planet around one of those stars. Here's a chart that shows the number of discovered exoplanets each year, and it shows their discovery method. And this is all the exoplanets discovered up to March 5th, 2020. Now, remember, an exoplanet, we've already mentioned this a little bit in lab, but an exoplanet is any planet around a star that's not in our solar system. So any planet outside our solar system is an exoplanet. Exo just means outside. So bugs that have an exoskeleton have a skeleton on the outside. So so exoplanet means a planet outside of our solar system. So as of today, and I was just looking today is November 7th, there are 4,301 exoplanets that have been verified as being discovered around another star. Here's the chart. We start our study of exoplanets. Basically, well, technically the first discovery of an exoplanet was in 1992, okay? And then since then, you can see how many exoplanets have been discovered. Only in the past 10 years, and maybe past 20 years, have we really increased this number of exoplanets substantially. And so the big number of exoplanets that we added here in 2014 and 2016, those primarily came from a spacecraft called Kepler, the Kepler Space Telescope, that was looking to find, this mission was to find planets around other stars. That telescope had a bunch of data releases in 2014 and 2016. And so that's why we have an incredibly large increase in the number of exoplanets discovered then. Right now, there's a telescope called TESS, which is Kepler's replacement, and it is currently searching for new planets around other stars. And we're going to see this number go up again as TESS keeps on taking more data of the sky. So these different types of detection methods, red is called radial velocity, green is the transit method, orange is microlensing, and blue is direct imaging. And we'll be talking more about the direct imaging method, transit method, and radial velocity method later. But you see that the majority of planets that are being discovered right now are through the transit method. Microlensing, we're not really going to talk about, but you can detect a planet by looking at how light gets bent around massive bodies, and then based on that bending of light, and you can infer that there's an exoplanet there. We're going to take a little trip through the timeline of exoplanet discoveries. The first exoplanet discovered was in 1992. Actually, there were 2 exoplanets that were found orbiting around one star, 2 terrestrial planets orbiting around a pulsar. Okay, so remember that pulsars are neutron stars that have a lot of magnetism associated with them, and they're shooting out this like beam of magnetism and high energy from their poles. And as that beam of light sweeps around, we see a pulse coming from that star, kind of like a lighthouse. So these planets are not going to be experiencing very hospitable conditions. But in any case, these were the first planets found orbiting around another star. In 1995, the first exoplanet was found around a main sequence star by these 2 guys right here. And they just recently won a Nobel Prize for Physics a couple of years ago because of this discovery. Usually astronomers will get their Nobel Prizes a couple of years after they've made their discovery. In this case, more than 20 years after their discovery, because you have to take a while to see how impactful was that discovery on science. And it's really opened the door, this discovery, to the study of exoplanets and the really important search to try to find them. So remember, a main sequence star is a star that's fusing hydrogen into helium in its core. Those are the stars along the main branch of the HR diagram. And this star around which they found the first exoplanet was called 51 Pegasi. And the planet that they found orbiting it was about half the size of Jupiter, but that planet is literally grazing the surface of the star. So it's probably a little bit too hot on the surface of that planet to be a very nice place to live. And it wasn't until 2001 when the first exoplanet was found in the habitable zone around another star. Remember that the habitable zone is the distance where it's just right away from the star for liquid water to exist on its surface. Sometimes this just right distance is called the Goldilocks zone. If you remember your nursery rhymes as a kid, you know, Goldilocks tried all the bowls of porridge, she tried all the beds, and she always found one that was just right. So the just right distance away from the star to have liquid water, that's the habitable zone, or the Goldilocks zone. In 2009 was when the Kepler Space Telescope was launched, and that's the one that provided so much data for us to really rack up those counts of the number of exoplanets that we've been able to detect. In 2014, with the help of data from the Kepler Space Telescope, the first Earth-sized planet orbiting within a star's habitable zone was detected. And so this planet maybe could have liquid water on its surface. This planet was called Kepler 186f, and it's just 10% larger than the Earth, and it's thought to be a terrestrial body. It's thought to be rocky. In August 2016, we found that the nearest star beyond the sun, Proxima Centauri, actually has a planet orbiting around it too. Proxima Centauri is about 4.2 light years away from us, so that means that the nearest exoplanet beyond our solar system is 4.2 light years away from us. So this planet orbiting around Proxima Centauri is, we think it's rocky, it's a bit more massive than the Earth. And the cool thing is that this planet also orbits in the habitable zone of Proxima Centauri, but Proxima Centauri is a little red dwarf. It's a little M-dwarf star. It's one of the M-type small stars on the lower end of the HR diagram. Those stars have a lot of magnetism, way more magnetically active than our own sun. So even if Proxima Centauri b is in the habitable zone around Proxima Centauri, because that star is so magnetically active, even if you were in the habitable zone around that incredibly magnetically active star, you'd be constantly bombarded with stellar flares, with coronal mass ejections, with space weather that would not make it a very nice place to live on that planet either. So you can be in the habitable zone of a star, but if your star has a lot of magnetism, it's still going to be really hard for you to be habitable unless you have a really great magnetic field of the planet to protect your atmosphere and to protect you from all of those particles coming at you from that nearby star. In 2017, 7 Earth-sized planets were found orbiting an M-type star, a small red dwarf star. This system, called TRAPPIST-1, is only 40 light years away from us, so not that far away from us either. But you've got 7 planets orbiting around that one star. And we're going to talk more about the TRAPPIST-1 system in another mini lecture. But that was a really exciting discovery to find out that it's not just the fact that you could have 1 or 2 or 3 planets orbiting around a star. You could have up to 7. And also there's recently been one that has been discovered where there's 8 planets orbiting around the star. In our solar system, we've got 8 planets orbiting around our sun. So, you know, there are solar systems out there other than our own that have just as many planets as we do. Maybe there's some out there that even have more. And finally, in June of 2019, June of last year, the number of exoplanets detected has exceeded 4,000. So now we know we're on our way to keep on finding more and more exoplanets. The more we look, the more we're going to find. And so we know that planets are not unusual in our galaxy, and certainly not in our universe. Well, this chart shows the number of planets by size that have been discovered. So we've got the number of planets on the vertical axis and their size on the horizontal axis. These are just for planets that have been discovered by Kepler up to May of 2016. So we see that the majority of these planets that Kepler was detecting have a size that are somewhere around what they call sub-Neptune to Neptune-sized planets. Sub-Neptune is anywhere from about 2 times the radius of our planet up to about 5 times the radius of Earth. We see that there's also a fair number of these planets that are super Earth-sized. A super Earth planet is a planet that's about 1.2 to 2 times our Earth's radius. There's also some Jupiter-sized planets out there too, some planets that are about Earth-sized and a little bit smaller. But the thing is that that doesn't necessarily mean that the distribution of planets in our corner of the galaxy is all going to be clustered around the sub-Neptune to Neptune size. It might be that Kepler is picking out preferentially some of these planets. Okay, it's harder to detect these little baby planets that are like Earth-sized and smaller around a star because they don't impact the observation of the light coming from the star through the transit method, which is how Kepler is detecting these exoplanets. So we'll talk more about the transit method here in a little bit. So it may be that the true distribution of planet sizes in our galaxy is different, but this is what Kepler was able to detect. Here's another chart of the distribution of exoplanets. Exoplanet populations, when we think about the size of those planets relative to the Earth and their orbital period. So the orbital period is how long does it take that planet to orbit around its star. Okay, and so 1 right here for the relative size to Earth, that would be a planet that is exactly Earth-like in its radius. Our Earth takes 365 days to orbit around the sun, so our orbital period would be right around here. So right there would be an Earth-type planet that is orbiting around a star in a year, 365 Earth days. So we see that there's a population of rocky planets in through here that are Earth-like in size and have orbital periods that are about the Earth's, or about the time it takes the Earth to orbit around the sun and shorter. That doesn't mean that there aren't planets out there that are Earth-like in size and that take a longer time to orbit around their star than we do. It just means that we haven't been able to detect them yet with telescopes. Why? Well, you have to watch that planet for a very long time in order to see whether it's there. In order to see how long it takes to orbit around that star, you have to watch it for a whole year if that planet is spending a longer time orbiting that star than we orbit our sun. And so that has an impact on our ability to detect whether those planets are there or not. It's easier to find these planets that are making much quicker trips around their star. And then we have the lava worlds here, which are super close to their star. And they're Earth-like in size. So they're going to be terrestrial bodies. So they're going to be able to melt some of that material that they're made up of and have a lot of lava flows and volcanism on the surface. Then we have the ocean worlds and ice giants, which are about size of Neptune. And then we have the hot Jupiters. Hot Jupiters are Jupiter-sized planets. So this is the size of Jupiter. Jupiter-sized planets that orbit super close to their star, which means that they're going to be really hot on their surface. And then we have the cold gas giants. Those planets are just the same size as the hot Jupiters. They're just much further away in distance from their host star, so their temperatures are going to be a little bit colder. In this lower corner here, we have this little triangle called frontier. So that's the regime on this diagram here, where our telescopes at the moment are not able to probe. Okay, why? Well, this region of this diagram is for planets that are about Earth-like in size or smaller. It's harder to detect smaller planets. And also out here, those planets have a long orbital period, way longer than the orbital period for us even around our star. So in order to catch the planets that are out here in this triangle that's labeled frontier, we have to watch for a longer time with telescopes in order to catch those planets orbiting around those stars. And also we have to improve the resolution of telescopes in order to detect those smaller planets orbiting around their star. So we still have a lot of work to do. Well, the exoplanet community has a lot of work to do in order to improve telescopes and detection methods so that they can finally capture all of these small planets that are orbiting much further away from their star than we are orbiting around our sun.